Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Killer Content panel for Camp YA. Hope you're enjoying Camp YA so far. It is grim and stormy outside here in North Wales, which is the perfect time to be talking about killer YA content and thrillers in general. I'm joined today, I should say, first of all, I am Kat Ellis. I'm the author of Wicked Little Deeds, if you're in the UK, and it's called Burden Falls, if you're in the US. I'm joined today by authors Sera Milano, who is the author of This Can Never Not Be Real, Kathryn Foxfield, the author of It's Behind You, and Cynthia Murphy, author of Last One to Die. So I thought, first of all, let's introduce ourselves and say a little bit about your latest book and what was the inspiration behind it. So let's begin with Sera, please.
So my book is, just realised I put it behind me, and it's not in short, so it's This Can Never Not Be Real. It's a minute-by-minute account of a terror attack on a small-town festival, and it's told through the eyes of 5 teenagers with nothing in common who have to rely on each other in order to survive the night. And my inspiration for it is kind of survivors' stories in general. I find that the news often focuses too much on the terrorists when they report stories like this, so I wanted to tell the stories of people who actually survive it.
It's so totally gripping. Absolutely loved it. And considering it's about a terrorist attack, I was amazed by how uplifted I felt at the end of it. So it was really cleverly done.
Good.
Kathryn, would you like to tell us a bit about your book?
Sure. So this is my new book, It's Behind You. It's about a reality TV show set in a haunted cave that goes horribly wrong when the contestants find themselves trapped with someone or something that wants them all dead. And it was kind of inspired by lots of visits to UK caves. I just love a cave. There's something amazing about how vast and ancient they feel inside. And so I've been to all of the ones in my little local area, Cheddar Gorge and Wookey Hole and Kemp's Cavern. And yeah, so I just sort of came up with the idea of trapping a bunch of teenagers in this cave and went from there.
Yeah, that is so totally my jam. I do the same sort of thing, explore local caves and things like that. So it definitely taps into a lot of my fears when I was reading your book. Yeah, just absolutely loved it. So Cynthia, would you like to tell us about your book?
Yeah, so mine was Last One to Die, and it's about a girl called Neve who comes from Ireland to London, and she starts a drama course. She starts to make friends, but all of those friends end up getting hurt or dying in mysterious ways, and Neve soon realises the connection is that they all look like her. So she has to navigate London and some new friends and try not to get killed in the process.
Love that final girl trope, and Neve being in an unfamiliar setting. Just absolutely loved how the supernatural came in there as well. All brilliant books. And now I have to follow up telling you a little bit about mine. Wicked Little Deeds is the story of a girl named Ava Thorne, who begins the book in a very bad place. She's just lost her parents a year before and had to move out of the family home, and thinks that she's kind of hit the lowest point. But then dead bodies start turning up around town, and the scary town of Burden Falls obviously has local legends about things like murder people. So all the locals think that it's this ghost called Dead-Eyed Sadie murdering these poor dead people, and the police think it's Ava. So she has to figure out what exactly is happening before she ends up in jail, or worse. Mine was inspired by a lot of different things, but in particular exploring some of my local area like Kathryn's was, and a local waterfall near me which is called Desert Waterfalls, and I was just walking past there one day, and there's loads of local legends attached to it. But I was thinking about, there are no ghost stories attached to it, and what kind of ghost story would I invent if I was going to attach one to a waterfall? So that's kind of where that part of it sprang from. So as we've all just heard, all 4 of these books are very different stories, but all fast-paced thrillers, which use isolated claustrophobic settings. For example, in Cynthia's book, you have a locked room in a library, which is really scary, and murders and attacks happening like in the London Underground at night time. The Umber Gorge Caves, obviously, in Kathryn's book. And then in Sera's book, we have this isolated manor, which is the site where the festival's being held and the terrorist attack happens. And all very fast-paced, these books. So let's talk a bit about why you write fast-paced thrillers and why you set them in places like these. So let's go with Cynthia.
Okay. I think partly attention is I write short kind of pacey things to keep my attention as well as the readers. But the locked room thing is just fascinating, isn't it? Like there's something really scary about something normal and something you're quite comfortable with suddenly becoming scary and a place of danger. And I was thinking about films like, so in the old horror films where, you know, somebody's in their house and they try to get out the front door and they can't, so they go up the stairs, and all of a sudden up the stairs is like the worst place they can possibly go, even though they know where they are and it's somewhere they should feel safe. So yeah, I think it's that thing of somewhere that should feel safe, and when it doesn't, what happens?
Yeah, absolutely agree with all of that. I think especially the locked room feeling, I love having isolated settings in a story, like a good fast-paced thriller. How about you, Sera?
I think similarly for me, I'm not such a thriller fan myself, particularly like films. I think the last film that I watched that was a thriller was probably The Day After Tomorrow, about 1,000,000 years ago, because I get very anxious very easily. So for me, it was just tapping into my own anxieties. And I guess my setting is kind of huge. It's a festival, so there's a huge field, there's thousands of people in it, but there's also a manor house that's in the grounds. And so I kind of find little spaces within both the field, and then they go into the house, and you're thinking, don't go into the house. It's not going to be a good idea to go into the house, but it feels in that moment like that's where you go to be safe. You try and put walls between yourself and the attackers, and you end up trapping yourself. But it's isolated in that the concert is far out of town. It's hard to get to. It's in a distant location, but it's kind of a way of being isolated with so many other people, and even other people who are in the same situation as yourself. Some of them trying to survive may make it harder for you to survive because they're trying to save themselves, whereas other people may help. So I kind of liked exploring the ways different people react to it as well. But yeah, it's my first fast-paced thriller, but it was a real joy to write. It really sort of carried itself along so well because of the general anxiety of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely does carry the pace along really, really well. How about you, Kathryn? Why do you write these sorts of stories?
Yeah, I mean, I love a really claustrophobic setting where you can have this sort of self-contained little story that happens over a short period of time, and your characters are trapped there, and there's no way for them to escape. And books that scare me tend to do this thing where you cut off your character's escape route, either literally, as I did with my book, where I've trapped them all in this massive cave, or sort of more psychologically, like in Cynthia's Last One to Die, she's taken her character away from their friends and family, and so she's sort of cut off from her escape route in that way. And I'm reading a book at the moment. Let me read it. How We Fall Apart by Katie Zhao, that just came out, and she does this amazing job of writing this character who is completely obsessed with academic success, and so you know that even if she could walk away from everything bad that's happening, she won't, because she's so determined to ensure that she succeeds. And yeah, I just love that feeling in a book where you know the characters can't get away.
Yeah, you definitely tapped into one of my particular fears when you were writing about there's a part in It's Behind You where the main character, Lex, has to go underwater inside a really narrow tunnel, and it's literally my nightmare.
That was actually inspired by the old horror film The Descent, which I think
I
I
love
recommended
that film.
to Cynthia once, and you hated it. But I love it. I just think it's amazing, and it's so claustrophobic, and they've got these weird creatures trying to eat them, but then they're also trapped in this massive cave system. So yeah, I wanted to bring some of that to It's Behind You.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely did bring that to it. So talking about then building fear and suspense, do you ever like channel your own fears and phobias into what you're writing? And what other techniques do you use to try and create sense of fear in the story? We'll go to you first, Kathryn.
I think I do. So, I mean, I've always been really scared of the dark since I was little, and it's just there's just something about being cut off from being able to see things that means your imagination can run wild, and you never know what's creeping up on you that could just be millimeters away and you wouldn't be able to see it. So I think I tried to bring that sort of feeling to my books, this sense of there might be something just around the corner, and then I leave it up to the reader's imagination to work out what it is, and is it real or is it all a mind game. And I like it when books do that, when they try and play, they do enough to get you into a situation so you really feel like you're there and you can feel it with all of your different senses and emotions. And then you just leave it up to your imagination to guess at what awful things are going to happen next. And I think the sort of switching the light on so you can see the monster always takes some of the scariness away for me. So I try to avoid that if possible.
Yeah, really good technique. But how about you, Cynthia? What do you do, and do you have any fears that you have channeled into your books? I think I might still be muted.
Yeah, I'm still on mute. You know what? Recently, I feel like I've been quite cocky and said, so there's not much that scares me these days. And then I went to Nottingham recently, and there was loads of caves there. But we went to the old jailhouse, the Justice Museum, and all the caves, the dark cells and stuff in the bottom. And I was walking around, and there was places that I just wouldn't go into because I was absolutely terrified that if I went round a dark corner, something was going to jump out that I couldn't control, or that there was going to be a ghost in there, and it made me remember the things that I'm scared of. I think COVID has maybe dulled it a little bit because we've not been anywhere. But definitely the dark, God, like sticking your feet out of bed at night, I still can't do it in case, the monster grabs onto your toes, or the thought of somebody hiding in the shadows or something kind of stalking you around. It's really, really scary. So I think I almost subconsciously put those in to Last One to Die, because there's a lot of stuff where Neve is kind of, she can't quite see what's going on, or she can hear things and her mind is going into overdrive, playing tricks on her. But I think that's the most fun as well. I think it lets you leave the reader to imagine their worst kind of nightmare. If you over describe it sometimes, like Kathryn said, when the monster's revealed, sometimes it loses a bit of its power. Whereas if it's just sneaking around the corners and the reader can imagine it's whatever they think is the scariest, then it's quite a fun way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially with horror and thriller readers, you can rely on them to fill in the blanks. I mean,
yes,
you can just sow the seed and then they will run with it. Yeah. But coming back to what you said before, Sera, it sounds as though writing, this kind of really intense thriller, it was quite an anxiety triggering thing. So are there particular things that you put into this story that were, things that you wanted to maybe play out?
I will tell you in a sec when I have put this headphone back in. Yeah, I think, unlike Cynthia, I am afraid of everything. I am a constant ball of fear in this world. And particularly things that happen in the real world. So news stories like terrorism. I find that I focus on them very strongly, and you live them vicariously, and you can't help thinking, what would I do in that situation? How would they stay safe? How would I keep the people that I care about safe? So I didn't sit down to write this story. I kind of told a few people that it woke me up one night, and I wrote down 3 pages of plot, and then I wrote the book in a month based on those 3 pages of plot that all came at sort of 3 a.m. one night. So I think it was just my collective anxieties that had sat around for a while and then went, let's resolve this. But for me, kind of focusing on the survivors was how I soothed my anxiety. So it was a way of soothing my anxiety rather than making myself more anxious, because the book starts and you know that all of the characters survive, which I think is unusual for a thriller. Obviously, there are lots of other characters that unfortunately don't, because it's based on a real situation kind of thing, and that's the situation with these attacks. But you know that the characters that you are following are going to survive, and I think that let me be quite brutal in places, with the reader's knowledge that the character that they're actually listening to will be okay. In terms of techniques, again, it told me what it was going to do, but it's written in 5 perspectives, and it jumps around, sometimes sentence by sentence, between different characters, and those characters can be on different sides of the festival. So it let me give a whole overview of exactly what was happening, and also I could build suspense with, say, one pair of characters, and you would know that something was going to happen in the other scene because of the way it was building in one, and then I could just jump across really quickly. So that was it wasn't a deliberate technique, but that was the way that it wanted to tell itself, and I think that worked to build the suspense with this particular one.
Yeah, it definitely did work exactly as you planned it, and I think that is why it did sort of leave me with that hopeful feeling at the end, is because, you're living it with them, but also knowing that, at least most of the characters that you care deeply about, they're going to be okay at the end. And it focusing on survival story, you never find out what the reason behind the terrorist attack was. That was a really interesting and unique.
It was really important to me. Yeah, I kind of feel like villains lose their fear if you try and get into their motives too deeply. I don't care, particularly in real world events, don't care what the terrorist's motive is. It's never going to be good enough for what they've done. So it was really important to me to take the voice away, because we always end up hearing about their manifestos and what they believe about women and things like that based on recent events. And I just think I want to take that voice away from them. I want to give voice to the people who have lived through this and survived it, and whose lives will be changed but will go on.
Yeah, that worked really, really well. And I think your story focuses very much on real life human terrors. And I think it's fair to say that Cynthia's and Kathryn's and mine all play around more with like possible supernatural, monstery type of elements of fear. So I'm curious actually to hear what all 3 of you think about, what is scarier? Is it always the human monster, the human reason behind doing something terrible, or can supernatural monsters create that same kind of fear? What do you think? Let's start with Cynthia.
I feel like I've answered this a few times now, and my answer changes slightly every time. Because I always say when I was younger, it would be supernatural. I would turn off the light and run up the stairs as fast as I could, even though there was never anything weird in our house, or But so the monsters wouldn't get me, and I mean I did that up until I was like 20. So then I think when you get older, you start to realise that real people can do really terrible things to each other. That becomes quite scary. And when you have a family and people that you love, I think it kind of, that develops as more of a fear, because you worry more about them than maybe yourself. However, saying that, I still love a good supernatural film where I think it's that suspension of disbelief. I can be frightened, but I know it's not real. So yeah, I think I would still say real life monsters are the scariest ones, just because they look like everybody else, and you can't tell at face value who creepy person is.
To tell sometimes. I mean, all of it, I think, are probably a little bit creepier than we appear. Kathryn, I would say that you...
Creepy was the wrong word.
Kathryn, I would say that It's Behind You and your books in general probably are the most similar to mine in that they walk that very fine line between, you know, what is real, what is supernatural. So what makes you want to walk that line? Do you find supernatural things more scary, or is it the human element?
I think in real life, people are always the scariest monsters out there, and the things we do to each other. And I think the world has been the nicest place to live in, I would say. So I kind of write books as a form of escapism, I think, to sort of get away from the real life monsters. So I do love a bit of a supernatural threat. And I like my supernatural to be, is it real? Isn't it real? What's in your mind? Because it's always the fear of the unknown that really gets me. And I mean, I can remember reading supernatural type books as a kid, and it used to just scare me half to death. And just like Cynthia, you're not aware of what an awful place the world is sometimes when you're a child. It's the werewolves in the dark that really get to you. And I try to remember that when I'm writing, that I'm writing for children. And I think, yeah, we don't need to represent exactly all the awful things happening in the world to scare people. I think sometimes just a dark room and something breathing down the back of your neck is enough.
It'll always be fun. And Sera, yours is the one without any supernatural elements whatsoever. But do you find supernatural things scary? Would you ever consider writing something with a supernatural twist?
Everything is scary, as I've said. I find everything terrifying. I really enjoy supernatural books, though. I mean, Kat, you know that I've loved your books for a long, long time, and I enjoy that. There's something that you do, and I think Kathryn also does, which is that kind of, you just don't quite know. So as you're reading, you get the fear of the supernatural. I mean, Mr. Jitters, ha! You get that creepy little monster thing, but then at the end you're like, oh, but it was a real person. And then you're like, but was it? So I enjoy that best of both worlds feeling, but I do also love a good ghost. I mean, I don't love them. I'm terrified of them. I hate a good ghost. They're awful. But yeah, in real life, obviously, the things that people are capable of is terrifying. And I think I explore that quite a lot in what I write. But yeah, I would definitely like to write. I grew up with fantasy and supernatural books, and I would definitely like to write something with a little bit more of a twist to it at some point. If I can write it without scaring myself.
I would love to read it. I think from my view, I go back and forth on this a bit, like Cynthia said before. You ask me one day, I'll say it's, supernatural monsters, because I know that I could never defeat them, but whereas I can run away from quite a few people. But yeah, the human element does tend to be more monstrous as a conclusion, I think. But yeah, my books always tend to walk that line and veer back and forth a bit over what is real and what is more scary. So yeah, in Wicked Little Deeds in particular, it's the first time I've written a ghost story. I hadn't really thought about it before I started writing it. What is going to be most terrifying to Ava in this situation? But when I did start to think about it, I thought, okay, a ghost would be absolutely terrifying, especially one that people think is murdering people. And whether that is true or not, I will not spoil for you. But there's also a lot going on in both Wicked Little Deeds and in Harrow Lake, my last book, which is very much down to, the human element that's terrifying the main characters. But I think one of the reasons that I go back and forth on it so much is that when I'm inside a main character's head, I am generally scared by whatever they are scared of. So I think, if you're writing a character or you're reading a character who believes in the supernatural, then that is going to be terrifying for them. But if you're reading somebody who's a bit more skeptical, as I tend to be, I go on ghost hunts all the time, but find, I've never been convinced that ghosts are real, but, I keep looking for them. So that's optimism, isn't it, really? And talking about, being inside your main character's heads, that's something that all of your books do really, really well. And that's with 5 main characters in case of This Can Never Not Be Real. And then we have Neve, who is, this displaced small town Irish girl who's in a brand new setting in London. And then we have Lex, who was such an interesting character. I really loved her. I think she's probably going to be like a Marmite character for a lot of people, but she was this unlikely, outspoken final girl, and I thought she was just brilliant. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about main characters then. Do you decide what main character you're going to have in your story first, or does something else come to you? Like, is it the plot or the setting that comes to you first? And how did you go about building your stories? And let's go to Sera.
So I have to again say it arrived at 3 a.m. one night and everything was kind of there. I would say the characters for me are usually a little bit ahead of the plot. I think the setting, actually, I get the setting first, so I know that there's something happening in this general sense, but then the characters sort of start talking to me and I just let them go. I definitely had a stronger feel for a couple of the characters when I started writing, but I found that they often grow between their interactions with other characters is how I learn about them sometimes. I found that with my previous books, which were definitely not thrillers, they were romantic comedies. But if I was struggling with a character, I would put them in a conversation with another character, and then I found myself learning about them just by using their voice. And also I find little snippets of voice or little lines that a character might say will come to me all the time, and I'll just write that down and go, oh, that's such that character line. So my iPhone notes when I'm writing a book are always full of snippets of dialogue that a character would say, and most of them eventually find their way in the book somewhere. So I think I find my way into it through the character voice, but I just sort of let them talk. I don't really do the big character study that I know some writers do, where they know what they have for breakfast and what their favourite colour is. I don't do that. I just let the voice percolate a bit. Usually it takes longer than this one did, but in this one they just kind of, I think the crisis situation also helps you learn about a character very quickly, because they have to make decisions very fast and you have to know why they're deciding that and what they want to get out of it. So I think that answers a lot of writers' questions very quickly, the what they want questions. If what they want is to survive, then you know how they're going to work and how they're going to do that.
Character, I think, is something that you do brilliantly well. Having read your other books as well, I know that whether it's a cute romantic comedy or 5 teenagers in a really traumatizing situation, it's just they are so real. And I felt that way about Lex as well when I met her in It's Behind You. I just loved that she was such an interesting and I felt unique character. I don't think I've read anybody like her before in a YA, especially YA horror. So was Lex the first thing to come to you with the story, or was it the plot or the setting?
So the first thing in all my books tends to be setting, and I'll come up with somewhere a bit scary and then think to myself, what would be the worst thing that could happen to a group of people trapped here? So for It's Behind You, I had the idea of trapping some people in a cave first, and then I decided that it was going to be a reality TV show just because that seemed like a fun and slightly ridiculous idea. And then when it came to writing the characters, I think in the past I've had a habit of writing characters who are a lot like me, so they tend to be quite quiet and shy and sort of they prefer watching everyone around them. And then when I come to edit the book, I have to try and inject some personality into them because the plot's really interesting and then the characters just sort of sitting there watching it happen. So when I tried to think of characters for It's Behind You, I knew they were going to be reality TV contestants and I couldn't fall back on the old shy, misunderstood girl. And in my first book, Good Girls Die First, I wrote this secondary character called Jolie that a lot of people liked, a lot of people hated her as well, but she was incredibly arrogant and confident and sort of took life by the horns and would leap before she thought. And so I wanted to write someone a bit like her. And so I came up with Lex and just tried to create someone who was basically the opposite to me and just who went out and just did things. And Yeah, I'm surprised that a lot of people like her, because I think in real life she would be an awful person to spend any amount of time with, never mind trapped in a cave, because she's an absolute nightmare. But she was also a lot of fun to write. I think sometimes this sort of character who just does stuff without dwelling on it, thinking about it, is very interesting to read about, because you just never quite know what they're going to do next. Yeah, I love her actually. She's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think the moment that I fell in love with Lex was when she said that she was going into these dark, dingy caves wearing a sharp white suit. That's just brilliant. Yeah, but on the other end of the spectrum, I think Neve in Last One to Die was such a relatable character. I could absolutely identify with her, looking back to my teenage self. Was there any of you in Neve, Cynthia? And was she, the first thing to come to you, or was it more plot and setting?
Yeah, no, Neve was probably the last thing to come to me. Spring Heel Jack was the first thing to come. And I kind of thought, oh, and what if he was still around? And what if he was in modern day London? And, what if somebody fell in love with him, and what would happen? So definitely the setting and the kind of plot came first. But then Neve, I just wanted a girl who was, normal, and she'd come from this small town and she was amazed by everything, and everything was dead exciting, and, and she was trying her best, but she didn't really know what she was doing in some situations. So I think there's definitely part of me in there. But I think if you write yourself, you tend to split yourself between characters, because there's definitely a bit of me in Jess as well, who ends up being Neve's best friend. She's got her head screwed on, but she's, she likes a bit of lipstick, and she loves museums, and that's all me as well. So I think you do end up putting little nuggets of yourself into different characters. Because then we've even got like Derek, who's the brash, just says it like it is kind of adult character, and that is also definitely me when I was a teacher, just like blatantly telling the kids how it was. So yeah, I think, but then my second book, the one that comes out in January, that was character straight away. It was a character, and it was a situation that came, and then the setting, because it was set at a comprehensive school at first, and then I thought, oh well, I could be really ambitious with this, and we can go big, like prestigious boarding school where everyone again is cut off and things can happen. So a bit of both, and I think it depends on the story. And the second one's more character led, the first one's more plot led. So I think it depends. Whichever comes first is like the important part, isn't it? The thing that is going to carry it through the story.
The driving force behind the story.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I think I'm closest to Kathryn in how I start my story ideas, and that it's always setting that comes to me first. I like to imagine a place, or whether that's like a boarding school or a whole town. I like to imagine a place, make it as creepy as possible, and then imagine the horrific, horrible people who would live there and the terrible things that they would do. So that's generally like my list of how I go about creating a story. I will just say now that we have a couple more questions left, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. Anybody who's watching, if you would like to send us a question, please do that in the comments box, and we'll come to those in just a minute. So as we are heading into spooky season, a few weeks away from Halloween, I would like to ask you what you are reading, what you have read recently that everybody else needs to put on their TBRs. So let's begin with Kathryn.
So I'm a bit weird. I have several books on the go at one time. I sort of spread them around the house and pick them up separately. So which is a slightly chaotic way to read. But at the moment, I'm reading. I'm going to make sure I get the names of them right. The Taking of Jake Livingstone by Ryan Douglas, which I've read half of that, and it is amazing and really creepy with this kind of sort of graphic novel type vibe to it, and I love that. I'm reading Every Line of You by Naomi Gibson, which is a great sort of spooky, well, it's not spooky, it's sort of slightly creepy sci-fi, I'd say. And then How We Fall Apart by Katie Zhao, which is a boarding school. Well, it's not boarding school, actually. It's a really posh, prestigious school horror-y, creepy thriller type thing. So I've only read a bit of that, but it's brilliant so far.
Excellent. And Cynthia, how about you?
I've just recently read You're So Dead by Ash Parsons, which is it's a bit of an Agatha Christie style. A group of influencers go to a festival called Pyre Festival, based on the infamous Fire Festival, which went, horribly wrong. But instead of it just being rubbish, it's also somebody's got quite murderous intentions, and they all start kind of disappearing one by one. So that was really good fun, actually. Really good kind of characters. You can just imagine all these Instagram influencers being, thrown off cliffs and things. It was quite fun. And also, Mark of the Wicked, I have to give a shout out to. So this is by Georgia Bowers. It's out in the US now, but I think you'll be able to get it in the UK in I think September the 14th. Although somewhere like Blackwell's I think already has it in. But it's a witchy, it's kind of being marketed as dark fantasy, but it's very magical realism. And it's kind of, if practical magic was darker and they did all of those bad things on purpose for personal gain. You've got a main character, Matilda, who is using magic, and she doesn't see the problem in using magic to get what she wants. But of course, it all starts to come back on her, and she has to learn her lessons. And the character's been called very morally grey, which is a nice way of saying she's a bit of a cow at the beginning. And but she's a brilliant cat. You absolutely love her because she's awful. So that's a definite Halloween recommendation.
Yeah, she does have kind of a Nancy from The Craft vibe about her, especially at the beginning. Yeah.
Definitely.
How about you, Sarah? What have you been reading in the lead up to spooky season, and what's on your TBR?
So what I'm reading at the moment is not exceptionally spooky. I'm reading a fantasy trilogy, which is the Kingdom of Brass Daevabad trilogy by Shannon Chakraborty, which is, I'm really enjoying it. So even though it's not that spooky, I'm going to recommend it. It's set in kind of the world of the jinn, so genies, but the jinn. And they've got a whole sort of city hidden in the desert. And it's kind of like a political intrigue thriller, but with lots of magic and powerful characters. And I haven't read a fantasy trilogy in quite a while, and I'm really enjoying it. But one that's coming up that I'm looking forward to is Dark and Shallow Lies by Ginny Myers-Sain. And it's described as being a murder mystery set in New Orleans and sort of set in a town full of psychics. And how do these psychics not know what's going on? Some of them do. There are lots of secrets and lies. And it seems like it's got a bit of a sort of Deep South True Blood type vibe to it, which I really enjoy. So I'm looking forward to that one. I think that sounds like a good Halloween read.
Yeah, absolutely. You're giving me lots to add to my Halloween to be read pile as well. A couple that I always recommend for good spooky reads. Dawn Kurtkich's recent book, Teeth in the Mist, which is like a dark gothic story set in the Welsh Mountains, obviously close to my heart being in North Wales. Melinda Salisbury's Hold Back the Tide as well, which is fantastic if you liked the cave settings of It's Behind You and movies like The Descent. I think I described that one as like The Village meets The Descent, so if you like those things, then that's a really good one. I've got The Taking of Jake Livingston already on my TBR, and adding all the ones that you just mentioned as well. Last year, I set myself a ridiculous target. I think I set 13 books that I was going to read in the run-up to Halloween, and I'm still working through them, so I'm not really adding any more apart from the ones that you've suggested. But yes, so I'm looking forward to catching up on some of the older books on my TBR over Halloween. So last question now before we go over to the audience questions. I would like to know, what are you all up to next? Do you have any events coming up, or what's your next book about, and what are you working on? So let's go with Sarah first.
So my next book, I'm currently editing the next book. It's out in March next year, and it's called Vile Stars. I will say it starts with a death, and the rest of the book is kind of working out the situation that leads up to the death. It's set during the beginning of the pandemic, and it's about coercive control, and kind of contrasting lockdown with being trapped in a very toxic relationship. Again, it's told in multiple perspectives, so it's told it investigates how the family of someone that's getting caught up in a relationship like that, brother, friend, and friends, and how they cope with it, as well as how she's dealing with it. So that's what's coming up next for me. It's called Vile Stars.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. I already have it on my TBR. What about you, Cynthia? What's next?
I have got a new book out in January called Win, Lose, Kill, Die. We just did the cover reveal at the end of July. And it follows Liz, who is at an exclusive boarding school. You've got to have a scholarship. Everyone there is ridiculously clever. So when people who are to be girls are being built up, her and her friends got to figure out who is doing it, and mainly because they are all kind of they're all in the line to be head girl. So it will be there. You can tell I've not pitched this yet. This is awful. It's really good. I'm editing it right now. But yeah, so it's set at a boarding school, no internet, no phones. They've just got to rely on each other. And it's told from 2 points of view. One is Liz's and one is the murderer's.
Sounds amazing. And I am a sucker for a boarding school thriller, so I'm really looking forward to that one. How about you, Kathryn? What's next?
Yeah, so I'm trying to write a book at the moment, and I'm probably missing all my deadlines, who knows. But yeah, I'm writing another YA thriller. It's less of a horror than my past two books, so there's no sort of locked room spooky setting. This one's going to be set in London with 3 points of view. But yeah, hopefully we'll have a bit of a creepy element to it. We will see when I've written it.
Sounds excellent as well, and I will look forward to hearing more about that one. Next for me, I'm also working on another book, which I can't really say too much about. It's going to be another horror thriller type story, and it's about two childhood rivals who end up trapped in a deadly swamp together. So naturally, why not? So that's what we're all up to next. But I will go now to our audience questions, and we've had quite a few. So, what is the published horror story you wish you'd written? Does anybody want to volunteer for that one? Cynthia.
Dracula. Has to be Dracula. It's so clever, and it's told from all different points of view, and it's the story, and it's the diary entries, and it's just brilliant. So yeah, that's the one I wish I could have written.
Excellent. Anyone else? Sera.
I was going to say Frankenstein, because Mary Shelley was amazing and basically invented the whole genre. But yeah, also the portrait of Dorian Gray is just so incredibly well drawn. That's a bit of a pun, but yeah, it's just so sort of spooky in an unexpected way. Not overtly spooky, but there's a horror of what men are capable of, as well as the supernatural horror going on there, which I really enjoy. But yeah, Frankenstein, really. I'd like to be Mary Shelley.
Absolutely feel that. How about you, Kathryn? Are there any classics or modern ones that you want to
say? Frankenstein. Oh yeah, a female writer, and then you got there before me. I think I've been trying to think of a modern one that I wish I'd written. I mean, I often get a bit jealous of different elements of people's books. I remember reading Your Harrow Lake and just loving Mr. Jitters so much. I wish I'd created him. I often get envy of the baddies in books, thinking, oh, they're so cool. But no, I can't think of any.
Thank you very much for the shout out there. I think for me, I'll go with the more modern one. Two actually that I wish I'd created. The Babadook, which is one of my all-time favourite horror films, and I think was the inspiration partly behind Mr. Jitters in Harrow Lake, because it has that layering to the monster. This monster who comes out of a storybook, but represents so much more than that. And as you get to know the characters in the film, you realise, it's like a metaphor for the depression and anxiety that the main character is feeling. So yeah, I really like the idea of like the layered monster. So I wish I'd created something like that myself. The next question is, what's your preferred medium of horror other than TV and film? Anybody want that one?
I don't watch very much of it on TV and film because I can't cope with it. It scares me too much. So it is books, but I watched the film of It when I was a child, Stephen King's It, the original film with Tim Curry as Pennywise. It scared me so much. So I bought the book and I read the book thinking this will help me to calm it down in my head. And like, I had to burn the book. I was too scared of having the book in my house. So I was only about 12. But yeah, so that book really got to me. But I definitely prefer reading. And I think that being able to create things in my mind is actually scarier in a way than seeing it on film and TV. So yeah, I think books are the scariest medium.
Absolutely, I get that as well. How about you, Kathryn?
Yeah, I would say very similar, that I can't watch that much horror, especially since having a family. I find it all too much to be sort of all of these images coming at me. So I tend to only read horror. Oh, lost cat. I don't tend to watch a huge amount of it. Something I'd like to get into though is graphic novels. Reading graphic novels and horror. I think that might be a lot of fun. So yeah, have to look out for some recommendations, I think.
I was just going to say graphic novels because I've just recently discovered them. I bought Thornhill, I think that was your recommendation, Kat, and I bought a Junjo Ito. I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong. And I bought the short story one, and they're brilliant because you just dip in and it's 5 minutes, and the pictures do a lot of the work. So you're kind of getting that imagery like you would in a film, but it's very, very fast. And they're things that I find myself reading them and kind of going, oh, okay. But then I'm thinking about them 5 days later, and they have this strange way of like burrowing into your subconscious and in a slightly creepy way. But I recommend Shiver, I think, is the I have, which is good.
Excellent. I've lost the questions. If the admins could post them up for me again. But while I'm waiting for those, I absolutely love listening to audiobooks. I think that's one of my favourite mediums for getting scared in. So yeah, and graphic novels, as Cynthia was just talking about. I'm a massive fan of Junji Ito, especially the Uzumaki book that he compiled. So yeah, absolutely love graphic novels as well. So I think they just bring an extra something to the scary table. I have the questions back. You'll be pleased to know. So what kind of scary is the scariest kind of scary? Does anybody want to answer that one?
I can go for it. I think I said a bit earlier in one of the questions, but for me, it's always the fear of the unknown is the scariest thing for me, and the sort of the hint that there's something terrible out there, but you don't know what it is, and that will always be the scariest thing for me in any kind of media or real life.
Yeah. How about you, Cynthia?
I think even though that is scary, the thing that makes me yelp while I'm watching something is when it's body horror. So when somebody gets impaled in the wrong way, or something pops out of somebody's face, or but that's what makes me sit there and go, no, I can't. So, but I'll still watch it because it's fascinating. So I don't know if that counts as scary, but that thought of body horror is
yeah, horrible. I agree with that one. It's something that I've dabbled a bit with as well, especially in Harrow Lake with like teeth in the flesh and things like that. As you do. Okay. Any more answers to this question before I go on to the next one?
Spiders.
Sera.
Spiders. Scary. Simple answer. Spiders.
They are a very scary kind of scary, unless you have what I have next to me, which is a spider catching device that just like with a good distance, you can catch them and release them without harming them. This is what you need, Sera.
I know your shelves. I thought you were going to bring up a tarantula or something. I was just like, no.
Or just, that, severed hand behind me. That's quite useful for catching spiders. Okay, let's go on to our next question. If you swapped places with your main character, how would you cope with the plot of your book? That's an interesting one. Who wants to answer that one first? Cynthia?
This leads in really nicely to that question about, is there much of your character, of you in your character? And one of my favourite things about Neve is that she does not run away. She doesn't drop the weapon. She just gets it done. And there's a line in there where she says, "Right, Neve, horror movie tip number 1, do not drop the weapon, because it drives me mad." That's what happens. And they do it. They stab the baddie and then they leave the knife next to the baddie within hand's reach and they go away. And he's never dead. So that was definitely me in Neve. So I think hopefully I'd deal quite well in that situation. Plus the baddie likes brunettes and I'm not one. So
I noticed that you'd made them different to you, so you're not the murder victim in that.
Well, I am a natural brunette, so there's definitely a little bit of me in there as well.
So you went blonde to avoid being killed by Spring-Heeled Jack. That makes perfect sense to me. How about anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, the 2 books that I have published, I think, have quite scary settings, and they're set in these on a derelict pier, and then this sort of rubbish tourist attraction in a cave. And I always joke that if I was in either of those situations, I would be dead within 5 minutes. I'd either fall off something and impale myself, or I'd be murdered and have not got the common sense to escape. So yeah, I wouldn't live. It'd be very sad.
How about you, Sarah? I know you've given this some thought.
Sorry, just having a fight with the unmute button. I think really the book came from me imagining how I would cope in that kind of situation. So a lot of what the characters do are kind of what I think I might do, but in any traditional thriller book or supernatural book, I would be dead instantly. I'd just give up. I'd just sit there and let them get me, because why waste time? But yeah, I think in so many of these real life situations, there is a huge amount of just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or luck, if that's the right word. That's something that my characters actually struggle with, is, can we be considered lucky when we were there to begin with? Can we be considered lucky when all these people have gone through such terrible things that we survived? So if I maybe got lucky, I might survive, but yeah, it's not a situation I would want to be in, but it's certainly a situation that I occasionally think how I would cope. You have to hope you'd get through.
Yeah, I have given a lot of thought to how I would survive in certain situations, and I just know that, not being a very fast runner or particularly strong, I would die at the first hurdle. I'm not a very good final girl. So yeah, I would just not do very well in that situation either. I'd be the first one to turn into a zombie. That's the thing that I would be famous for. I would fall first. So we've had some more questions, which I'll try and get through because we've only got a few minutes left. What are your plans for Halloween? Does anybody have any spooky plans?
No. I have. Oh, sorry, Cynthia. Did you want to?
It's okay. No, I was going to say I'm on a hen do, so depending on how spooky you think that is, that's what I do for Halloween.
Yeah, I have a 7-year-old who is obsessed with Halloween, and so I'll be doing all the kiddie stuff, I think, if it's safe to do so, doing sort of socially distanced trick-or-treating and all the costumes, and yeah, I love all that stuff. I never really got into Halloween when I was a kid. It didn't seem to be a thing. So now that I'm grown up and I have a child, it's like, yeah, and decorate the house and make ivories and cocktail sticks and sausages that wrap up in pastry to look like mummies. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
What about you, Sarah?
And I think I might be going to see the Rocky Horror Show, which is always a good time on Halloween.
Yeah, I think I'll be doing the standard thing of just, staying in, scaring the trick-or-treaters, because I have this doorbell that screams. So I'll be doing that, but just watching horror films beside that. Can you tell I haven't got kids, so I'm not worried about the nightmares they're going to be having. The next question is, do you have any plotting advice for anybody who would want to write books like ours?
I think Save the Cat really helped me, just in terms of having a beat sheet, so laying out what was going to happen when, even if I didn't know exactly what it was, I knew that it's been an exciting incident, and then you've got to have your big middle point where, you know, everything seems to be kind of come clear and maybe starts to become resolved, and then you can treat your characters to some really awful, terrible things that happen like on the way back down. So definitely plotting in terms of every 5,000 words or so, I like to have something happen, because then you kind of constantly keeping people on edge.
Yeah, I think for me, I add in a lot of the spooky stuff, and tightening the pacing always comes to me when I'm revising a story. My first draft is just getting the rough plot out and an idea of the setting that I've created, and the characters tend to be a bit one-dimensional in my first draft. So yeah, when I come to revise a book, that's where, you know, I really sort of dig into things like pacing and building character and making sure you layer and layer and layer with all the revisions that you do. So yeah, that's my advice if you want to sort of up the ante with scares and things like that. How about Kathryn and Sera?
I think that for me, if you get stuck, write a bit that you're excited for. So it's fine to jump ahead, write something that you know how it's going to go or you're excited to get to, and then find a way to get there. But my other thing that really helps me when I'm writing, because I rarely have a very strong plot written out beforehand, is I make sure each chapter ends and you need to get to the next chapter. So if I need to get to the next chapter to find out what's happening, then the reader's going to need to find out what's happening. Never just sort of go, and then this happened, and then this happened. It's always, because this happened, that happened. So you give it a reason for the action to carry on.
Brilliant.
Something that helps me is to know where I'm aiming for. So to know the ending, to know what my baddie wants and what they're trying to get, and to know how they're going to be defeated at the end. And I think if you're not someone who plots lots before you write, it does help to have an end point that you're aiming for, so you don't meander off in a million different directions.
Absolutely brilliant advice. As we have reached the end of our allotted time, I don't think we had too many questions I didn't get to, but sorry if I didn't get to your question. But thank you all very, very much for joining me for this excellent chat. I hope everyone watching has enjoyed it, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of Camp YA as well. Just a couple of things I want to say. If you would like to win a copy of Kathryn's book, there are 5 copies of It's Behind You up for grabs on various blogs. If you follow Camp YA on Instagram, all the details are there. And This Can Never Not Be Real is the prize for Team Spirit in the Camp YA Cup. So if you're taking part in that, you could be the winner of that book. But thank you all very, very much for joining me. I hope you had a good time. See you all later.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.